The morning sun spilled across Willow Creek, casting long shadows over the quiet lawns and tidy homes of a neighborhood that thrived on routine. Birds chirped lazily, a lawnmower hummed in the distance, and the air carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass. For Tom Brennan, this was the rhythm of a life he'd built with Korea's sanctuary of peace, hard-won after years of chaos. In his garage, he hunched over a temperamental generator, its gears as stubborn as his own resolve. Grease smeared his hands, sweat beaded on his forehead, but he didn't mind. Out here, with tools in hand and the world at arm's length, he felt whole. Out front, his wife of 2 decades, Sarah, knelt in the garden, her worn baseball cap shielding her eyes as she coaxed life into her flower beds. Dirt dusted her jeans, and she hummed softly, tending to each bloom with the same quiet love she poured into everything. At the edge of the driveway stood a tall flagpole, its American flag rippling gently in the breeze, faded but proud. It had flown there since they lost her brother, Marine Sergeant Daniel Carter, killed in Afghanistan. Sarah had fought to keep it, defying every neighbor who called it too bold, too big. It was his, and it stayed. Then came the knock. Not a tap, but a pounding 3 heavy thuds, a pause, then 3 more, louder, impatient. It wasn't a neighbor's knock or a delivery's courtesy. It was a demand thick with purpose. Sarah glanced up, her hand resting on her hip, a reflex when something felt off. She turned off the hose, coiled it loosely, and walked toward the porch, her brow furrowed. Tom, lost in the clank of metal and the hum of a garage fan, didn't hear it at first. But the second knock, sharper, cut through. Before Sarah reached the door, a cry high, raw, panic tore the air apart. It wasn't a word, just a sound, wrong in every way, sharp enough to snap Tom's head up. His wrench clattered to the concrete, and his boots hit the ground, each step faster, heavy wire, as dread coiled in his chest. Something had crossed the line, and whoever caused it was about to learn what that cost. Sarah opened the door cautiously, her politeness a habit even for strangers. 2 men stood on the porch, unfamiliar yet dressed to deceive. Their navy polos bore stitched patches saw community standards units saw over a vague emblem that mimicked authority but didn't hold up under scrutiny. Khaki pants, black boots, and an air of rehearsed control completed the act. The shorter man, stocky with a clipboard, wore a practiced scowl. The taller one, lean and wiry, stood back, his stare too sharp, too hungry for control. "Mrs. Brennan?" the shorter one asked, not waiting for her nod. "We're here about your HOA violation. That flagpole exceeds height restrictions. It disrupts neighborhood aesthetics." Sarah blinked, caught off guard. "The flag?" Her voice held a mix of disbelief and defiance. "It's for my brother. He was a Marine, killed in action. We've had it up for years. This is our property, it's not going anywhere." The shorter man's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. The taller one stepped forward, Yunin Vy Ted, his movement sudden. Without a word, his hand flashed up and struck her cheek, not loud, but sharp, final. Sarah stumbled back, her hand flying to her face, eyes wide with shock, not just from the pain but from the audacity of it. "Enough with the sob stories," the tall man snapped, his tone venomous. "Rules are rules." Time froze in the heat. Then, from the garage, a single metallic clang echoed, a tool hitting concrete. Tom had heard enough, Sarah's voice, the silence that followed, the insult in the stranger's tone. He knew that quiet, the kind that comes right before something breaks. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on a rag, his movements deliberate, his eyes narrowing. He didn't shout or run. He walked toward the house with a stillness that carried weight, a calm that promised consequences. The screen door slammed open as Sarah stood frozen, her hand still on her cheek. Tom stopped on the porch, his gaze flicking between her and the 2 men. For a heartbeat, the world tilted. Sarah's eyes, wide with disbelief, met his, silently pleading for him to make sense of this violation. The men stood their ground, casual, arrogant, as if they'd done this before, as if they owned the moment. "We're authorized by HOA regulations," the shorter one said, flashing a badge that glinted in the sun. Tom saw it for what it was: plastic, flimsy, a lie. Saw Community Standards Unit saw. It read, no seal, no number, just bold letters and false power. This is your final warning, the man added, like he was granting a favor. Tom didn't answer. He looked at Sarah, saw the red mark blooming on her cheek, her trembling hands, her strength made small by their audacity. That was enough. His jaw tightened, his eyes turned cold, not wild, but focused, like a blade finding its mark. He stared at the men, long enough to make them shift, to make them feel the line they'd crossed. Then, without a word, he stepped back, closed the door softly, and walked inside. His boots echoed on the hardwood, steady, purposeful. He didn't need to threaten them. What came next would do that for him. Inside, Tom moved with precision, past photos of their wedding, their son's baseball games, Daniel in his dress uniform, forever young. He felt their weight, not as memories but as reasons. In the study, he knelt before a locked oak cabinet, pulling a worn key from his pocket. The safe opened with a click, revealing handguns, documents, and wrapped in dark cloth something heavy. The Barrett M82.50 caliber rifle. He unwrapped it with care, not reverence, responsibility. It hadn't been touched in a year, but it felt like an extension of him now. He checked the chamber, slung it over his shoulder, and walked back to the porch. The world outside had changed. The wind had died, the birds had hushed, the neighborhood held its breath. The two men were still there, but their swagger had vanished. They saw the rifle and froze, their faces draining of color. Tom didn't raise it. He didn't need to. Its weight on his shoulder spoke louder than any shout. "You've got 5 seconds," he said, voice low, calm. "Start walking." The words weren't loud, but they cut like steel. The countdown was real. The shorter man twitched, his mouth opening as if to protest, to flash that fake badge again. But his eyes locked on the rifle, and the words died in his throat. The taller one broke first, stepping back, then stumbling toward their silver SUV, his arrogance gone. The shorter one followed, his clipboard slipping to the porch, forgotten. They scrambled into the vehicle, doors slamming, tires squealing as they fled. It wasn't graceful, it was desperate, a retreat that needed no chase. Silence settled over the porch. Tom stood still, watching the SUV vanish, the rifle steady on his shoulder. Only then did he exhale, not in relief but in control. Behind him, the door creaked. Sarah stepped out, her movements slow, her hand still on her cheek. She looked at the empty driveway, the abandoned clipboard, then at Tom. Her eyes held no tears, only a mind racing to catch up. He lowered the rifle and turned to her. "Call the sheriff," he said, voice steady. "Let's do this right." It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about making sure no one else faced this violation. When Sheriff Harper arrived, a broad man with decades of experience, the adrenaline had faded, replaced by focus. Tom sat at the dining table, a USB drive blinking in his laptop. The porch camera had captured everything: the knock, the fake uniforms, Sarah's calm defense, the slap, the rifle, the retreat. Harper removed his hat, nodded to Sarah, and watched the footage in silence. His brow furrowed deeper with each frame. "That's Carl Morrow," he said, pointing to the shorter man. "Runs a shady towing racket in Lakeside. Lost his license for extorting folks. His buddy's Vince." He leaned back, exhaling. "They're not HOA. They're nothing. No permits, no authority, just scams." Tom nodded. He'd known from the start real power doesn't announce itself so loudly. Harper noted scattered reports of similar harassment, always vague, always just believable enough to intimidate. "Nobody got it on Video until now," he said, his voice hardening. Sarah stood by the wall, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the screen's final frame. The red on her cheek was fading, but her resolve wasn't. "They picked the wrong house," Tom said quietly. Harper nodded. "And the biggest mistake of their lives." The sheriff stepped outside to radio for backup, starting a county-wide search. Sarah picked up the USB drive, turning it over in her fingers. "They've been doing this for months," she said, her voice calm but fierce. "Scaring people, acting official, betting on fear." She looked at Tom, then toward the sheriff's cruiser. "Not here. Not anymore." They hadn't just stopped 2 months, he'd sparked something bigger. Within days, the story spread, not through headlines but through whispers. A neighbor stopped Sarah, admitting they'd paid the men to avoid trouble over a non-compliant mailbox. Online forums lit up with similar stories from across the county, same men, same lies, same pressure. The sheriff's office was flooded with leads, photos, and shaky doorbell footage. Warrants were issued, and within a week, Morrow was caught at a gas station, Vince at a traffic stop near the border. The footage and VY-TIM reports left no escape. News outlets dubbed it the HOA imposter scam, but Tom declined every interview. He and Sarah repainted their garden fence, ordered a new flag 10 feet by 15, bold and unapologetic. They raised it together, the stars and stripes snapping in the wind, a statement louder than words. Neighbors honked in approval, shared their own stories, their fears shrinking in the flag's shadow. Tom never touched the Barrett again, but he kept it ready, not out of fear but principle. This was their home, their line, and they'd defend it. A month later, a letter arrived, no return address, just Tom's name in careful handwriting. A woman across town wrote of her son, shaken by the same men over a bike violation. He'd seen Tom's story, refused to comply, and told her everything. "You gave us permission to stand up," she wrote. "You didn't just protect Sarah. You protected us all." Tom folded the letter, sat beside Sarah on the porch, and watched the flag wave under a starlit sky. "Think they'll try again?" she asked. Tom sipped his coffee, his eyes on the flag. "They'd be stupid to," he said, not as a threat but a truth. "Some men don't shout or seek fame, but when harm knocks, they rise quiet, clear, and unshaken. And when they do, the world notices."